Welcome to the Superlatives Film Podcast, Cinema Curated. My name is Jack Hamley. I am a writer, programmer, and film critic, and I am joined as always by my co-host Shay Westcott, also a writer, programmer, and film critic. In anticipation of arguably the biggest night in the American commercial cinematic construct, we would like to welcome you to our special Oscars episode. In this installment, we will cover the state of the Academy in 2019, and then help you dominate your Oscar pool with our annual Will, Should, and Best segment, where we select our choices for who will win, who should win, and the actual best films and performances of 2018. It's all things Oscars here on the Superlatives Film Podcast.
It's no secret that this has been a pretty tumultuous year for the Academy Award ceremony itself. Everyone has been suspiciously upfront about the fact that it seems like no one has any idea what they're doing or where they're going. From the controversy over picking and then losing a host, the back and forth about cutting categories, it's definitely led to a loss of any mystique surrounding the whole production. Even though there's always been this voice in the back of my head telling me that I really should know better, I'm usually a lot more excited leading up to the ceremony. From a young age, I really brought into it that notion of Hollywood's biggest night, the idea that it meant something, that it's somehow important. When I was a kid, back in the days of VCR, because I wasn't allowed to stay up for the duration of the ceremony, I would actually have my mother record the entire telecast on VHS tapes. Sometimes it would take multiple tapes, not only just so I could get up in the morning and watch the ceremony fresh before, God forbid, there were any spoilers on the news or in the morning shows, but so that I could actually label them for posterity and re-watch them throughout the year in my downtime.
Wow, Shay.
I know. If there's an Oscars nerd, I'm an Oscars nerd. Even in the past few years, when they posted the ceremony in its entirety on Hulu, I've gone back in the days to follow and rewatched the whole thing, just to relive certain moments or catch something that I missed when I was on a bathroom break. It just felt like a necessary part of the process. But even as a diehard fan, I really just can't imagine I'm going to be compelled to do that this year. It has all been so underwhelming and exhausting, and it hasn't even begun. So all of this is to say that I do still believe the awards mean something. I would be lying if I didn't say there was a part of me that's always still going to be holding out for another Moonlight moment or something like that. I think it's virtually impossible to love cinema without becoming invested in the Oscars. I think where it can be tempting to give up or dismiss the ceremony entirely, they are still an industry standard, and it's important to recognize that they play a part in exposing a lot of the country to cinema they wouldn't normally see. You know, I personally don't need something like, say, a Moonlight to win Best Picture in order to validate it. I know its worth. But I think a lot of America does. And so that I think it makes more sense to keep challenging the Oscars to do better, to try to evolve than to just ditch them completely. The Oscars really determine the state of cinema and kind of have the final say on cinema as art versus entertainment, what value ends up being placed on films and filmmakers, and what trends we're going to be seeing over the years because of those results. One thing that I will also say I actually think might be a positive this year is the choice to go without a host. We got to that point pretty ungracefully, for sure, but without even addressing whether or not Kevin Hart, or really anyone for that matter, can be objectively problematic, I really think it shows that the days of having anyone at all that we can collectively get behind as an entertainment icon or representative of the current cultural zeitgeist are really just behind us.
But women love Billy Crystal.
Reference to Big Mouth. I'm sure we've got some other Big Mouth fans out there. But no, I mean, I don't think you'll ever see another single person announced as a host that isn't going to upset or disappoint or alienate or just severely underwhelm a huge faction of the Academy's audience. So I don't think this experiment really has to be the disaster everyone's making it out to be. I think it could be an opportunity for the Oscars to adapt and evolve its format. I mean, if the most common complaint is that the entire thing feels stale and predictable, why not just lean into that idea and try something new, try and make it a positive at least? But Jack, what do you think about the state of the Oscars this year?
Well, once again, Shay, I fear you're proving far more optimistic than me. For me, I remember a mere 2 years ago when we had jointly decided to pass on that Academy Awards party hosted by a wonderful nonprofit that we both love, specifically because we couldn't bear what we just knew was going to happen. Namely, that given the demographic makeup of the Academy voters, so white, so old, so privileged, so within the artistically conservative bubble, it just felt so inevitable that the rather mediocre La La Land was going to take home Best Picture at the expense of Moonlight. And then, when producer Jordan Horowitz petulantly announced that Moonlight had actually won, it almost shaved for a glorious moment, and even more so in the light of the announced plans of the Academy to widen the diversity of its voting members, felt like the years of my hate watching the Oscars might just be coming to an end.
But isn't hate watching so much fun?
Well, it is, but hey,
It's part of it.
But it felt like a signal that perhaps this grand old institution, which for better or worse, as you pointed out, serves now instead of critics as Middle America's curation tool for the discovery and dissemination of supposedly the best films, filmmakers, and performers, might just be growing up in terms of a real historical arc towards serious film criticism and cinephilia. And then we flash forward to last month. When the nominees for Best Picture were announced, I was simply at a loss for words at the about-face we endured. It is hardly hyperbole to declare here and now that this crop of Best Picture nominations may just prove the worst proffered in my entire lifetime of watching this broadcast. In a year of perhaps the greatest black cinematic representation in decades, and with a stunning number of brilliant female-helmed films, with an unprecedented amount of daring, innovative, avant-garde, and politically provocative offerings from first-time filmmakers, but perhaps the most since the American independent movement of the mid-90s, are we really, Shay, to believe that Vice, Green Book, Bohemian Rhapsody, another Star is Born remake, and a Marvel superhero film are really the best films of 2018? Are you really going to look America in the eye and try to tell us that these insipid, bland, contrived, lazy studio offerings are actually critically better pieces of art than First Reformed, or You Were Never Really Here, or The Other Side of the Wind, or Leave No Trace, or Burning, or Cold War? Are you actually claiming that they are more daring and innovative and vital to the national zeitgeist than Blind Spotting, or Eighth Grade, or Sorry to Bother You? Shay, I fear that for me, the state of the Oscars is not strong. But there is still time, Academy. There's the hopefulness in me. There are two roads still diverging in the woods. I am sorry you cannot travel both. And if you fear the grip of irrelevancy, then you can always take the road less traveled by and become of value to America again as an ally of the actual best of the possibilities of American cinema. And the Academy, I hope you do.
I think those are some fantastic points. So well put. I really could not agree more. But I think this is a great place to just get into our picks. You know, while definitely there are a lot of categories where I think we're going to agree that the Academy really missed the mark here. You know, I'm still really excited to hear your take, and I think the highlight or the real fun part of this exercise too is always the actual best. A huge part of this podcast is that we really hope you will join us in reaching out in the cinematic universe and exploring some new films. So let's go ahead and get into it.
May I have the envelope, please?
And the Oscar for Best Picture is presented to...
And the Oscar goes 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 to...
In this segment, we revive an annual tradition that I first introduced on the Alone in the Dark film blog some years ago. Namely, who will win, who should win, and the actual best, in which we prognosticate not only who will win in a select group of categories, but who might just be the more deserving among the crop of nominees. And lastly, we choose the actual best film, filmmaker, or performance of the year, most likely one that the Academy and the rest of the country has tragically ignored. Shay, we'll take on 10 of the more popular categories and make our selections. Additionally, for stakes, we will pit our Who Will Win selections against one another to declare a Superlatives Film Podcast Oscar champion, to relish in the accolades of our amazing listeners for an entire year, while the loser must sit through and report on a film night curated by the winner to be reported on in a later episode. Shay Westcott, do you agree to these stakes?
I agree.
Fantastic. Should you prove the Grand Master of the Academy, what film or films will I be forced to endure?
All right, so this one has been coming for some time, but I am going to ask you to watch not one, but two of the Twilight Saga films.
Oh, yes. All right.
The first entry, just Twilight, and then the second, New Moon. But with the catch that after you watch these films, we will dedicate a small segment to you on air discussing Team Edward versus Team Jacob, and you do have to pick one.
I can't choose a tie with that. All right. Fair enough, agreed. And should I win, Shay? I was trying to contemplate how to do this. A part of me wanted to force you to return to rewatch Mad Max Fury Road and report on the obvious feminist themes and tropes of the film, which you so callously chose to ignore upon your first viewing, in which you yelled at me and told me that I owe you a bottle of wine for wasting your time with that film. However, knowing as you do my love and dedication toward Die Hard as being one of the greatest movies ever made, I felt it only fitting that, should I win, you will watch a film night in which not only do you have to watch Die Hard, but then you must do a follow-up in one sitting of Die Hard 2 and Die Hard 3.
All right, so the stakes are high. It sounds like I might have a lot of Bruce Willis ahead of me. So I'm going to have to choose pretty wisely.
That's right. Welcome to the party, Shay. Let's get to it. All right, our first category in following the traditions of the Academy is Best Supporting Actor. Shay, in the category of Best Supporting Actor, who will win at the Academy Awards?
Mahershala Ali. I think the supporting actor categories are kind of set in stone. Mahershala Ali is a star. He is someone that transcends into that category of that person who everyone kind of likes, everyone wants to kind of see succeed. And while I love him and I cheered for him when he won for Moonlight, I do think it's a really safe choice. This is going to be an easy place for the Academy to pat itself on the back for awarding a person of color while still really upholding this very conservative structure where the very nature of the supporting actor of color is just to bring out the good in the central white character. So, I'm happy for him, but I think it's going to be kind of an unexciting win, bittersweet.
Like you, who will win is, again, Mahershala Ali. Yes, I think you're spot on with everything there. He's certainly trending on track through all the major award shows to pull this off. And, like you said, we're all cheering for this discovery of such an amazing actor. I remember sitting transfixed when Moonlight ended, not just on the beauty and complexity of the film itself, but his performance alone was so transcendent in that film. And I think it's been a major discovery in cinema ever since. Even all the way up to True Detective Season 3, he's definitely having a year, although I would proffer that this is certainly not the best thing he's ever done, and proves, in my opinion, to be the only redeeming performance in a rather mediocre film. But all that being said, this one is a lock. Mahershala Ali will win Best Supporting Actor. Within this group of nominees, Shay, who should win?
Okay, I'm going to go Adam Driver here. I don't think Adam Driver has turned in a bad performance to date. He elevates a lot of the films he shows up in, and I think it would do a lot of good to acknowledge him and the more unusual presence that he brings to the screen. Unfortunately, I don't think he was even the best supporting actor of BlacKkKlansman, which really goes to show how weak and off the mark this category was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you with that. I don't even think he was the strongest performance in BlacKkKlansman. For my taste, that would go to the much under-lauded Topher Grace this year.
Absolutely.
However, within that category itself, I just don't see anyone that within that group did a better performance, in my opinion, than Mahershala Ali. For my take, he should win this category from his peers as well. All right. Putting the Academy aside, Shay, what was the actual Best Supporting Actor performance this year?
Okay, so right out of the gate, I'm going to break the rules. I'm going to have a tie.
Oh, right out.
This was a really great year for supporting actors as villains, and that's where you absolutely could have your Topher Grace. But two films this year had just dream ensemble casts where one actor somehow carved out the space to just dominate their scenes. One of them is hilariously and flamboyantly villainous, and the other downright scary, and at the end a little bit tragic. And so for me, those two actors are Nicholas Hoult in The Favourite.
Yes.
And Daniel Kaluuya in Widows.
Oh, all right. Marvelous choices. All right. Well, since you took this opportunity to cheat right at the onset of our thing, I will do likewise in this category between two performances that I just thought were masterful. My first pick is a brilliant newcomer with perhaps the most audacious performance of the year, and that is Rafael Casal, who was the standout in my personal favorite film of 2018, Blindspotting.
I have to say, he was so incredibly good. I just kind of assumed that he was playing himself, that character was him
so
in some way.
Right?
And then I saw a video of him, and he could not be more different in real life. And I was blown away.
He's magnificent. And, it's not often you get to feel the electric pulse of discovery that a new voice or a new movement was announcing itself before you in the dark. I felt that once in 1989 when a kid named Mookie picked up that trash can, and I felt it again here. And Casal was a big reason why. I cannot wait to see what he does next. And the other performance is a journeyman actor who also happens to be one of America's greatest unsung treasures. This is the great American actor, playwright, television and stage director Colman Domingo, whose turn as the loving family patriarch in If Beale Street Could Talk both moved and devastated me. Shay, Colman Domingo should be a household name, and shame on us that he is not.
Okay, Jack, so I want to talk about Best Documentary. What will win Best Documentary Feature?
All right, this one is tough because there are two films so close right now. But I'm going to say that the scales will be tipped in favor of Free Solo. While this could easily be a toss-up between it and RBG, which I personally felt was the more geopolitically relevant and provocative selection, in the end that I feel that the absurd stakes from the protagonist of Free Solo, the breathtaking camera work, and the sheer celebration of human potential will win out over the more rote and feel-good fare that is RBG. It's tough. This one may be my undoing here in our contest, but I'm going Free Solo.
Okay, so I'm going to go the opposite way.
Yes.
I could be totally wrong, but just given the political climate and the zeitgeisty nature of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and everything that she stands for in our culture, it just feels like RBG can't lose. Coming from an art house cinema background, it was also the most popular film of the year with so many independent and art house cinemas, which I suspect is where most people are seeing their documentaries out in the world. So just what I've seen from theater goers and the more diehard documentary crowd, I'll go RBG. But what do you think should win?
This one for me is easy. Who should win is Hale County, This Morning, This Evening. I've not seen such a beautiful and poetic documentary in some time. It is a literal deconstruction of several years in the lives of two African-American protagonists chasing hoop dreams in a small southern town. But it is so much more, Shay. The sheer beauty and devastation of its characters and scenes that are left to simmer in juxtaposition to one another, often with long sequences of little to no dialogue, felt like a filmic experiment not seen in years that seeks to challenge your preconceptions about race and exploitation and the American dream. This film is audacious. It is difficult at times. And Shay, no one in the Academy will vote for it, but it is an experience not to be missed.
I could not agree more. I don't have a lot to add. I just want to echo your statements. I think, sadly, this film has no chance in hell. But if there were any justice in the world, then Hale County, This Morning, This Evening should win. It is, not surprisingly, the first-time director, Ramel Ross, is a photographer, among many other talents. And this is the most beautifully shot film of the year, although we have seen how much cinematography matters to the Academy, so I'm not going to put a lot of faith that that's going to make a difference with voters. But it's just a gorgeous, immersive, poetic film that should absolutely be seen, and I hope its nomination, at the very least, will go a little way in it finding a larger audience.
Let's hope.
But let's move on to what's really important here, which is our opinion. So what is the actual best documentary of the year?
Oh, Shay, again, for most of the year, I was leaning heavily on the haunting meditation on migrants and crustaceans, the marvelous island of the hungry ghosts. But after experiencing Hale County, for all the reasons I said above, Hale County, This Morning, This Evening by writer-director Ramel Ross is the actual best documentary of the year. Again, I loved this film. Please go see it. It's not for everyone, but it is simply art in the truest sense of the word. Even if you don't love it, I promise you'll never forget it. And that is the point of art, after all, right? To be provoked, to be sometimes taken out of your comfort zone, to see things from a new perspective, to experience empathy in a way that you may have not thought possible. And even if you don't love this documentary, the sheer experience of watching it will provide all of that for you.
You know, I think those two could actually make a great double feature. They are very similar in many ways, and that would be definitely an experience to have in an afternoon. I could easily put Hale County here as well, but I'm going to go with Sandy Tan's Netflix-distributed film Shirkers. Nothing else this year captivated my imagination like Shirkers. It makes such a specific story feel universal in the coming-of-age sense, and also as this accidental time capsule for a specific time and place. Tan takes her pain and her fixation on this mystery and channels it into art that is cathartic, that speaks to a whole community of people that only this story can bring together. I think it is such a gem of a film, and I'm just really sad it wasn't recognized. I hope more people go and see it.
Great film. Loved it. All right, Shay, on to one of my favorite categories, Best Foreign Language Film. Shay, who will win?
I think Roma is going to win here, mostly because I don't think it'll win both Best Foreign Language Film and Best Picture. And I think this gives a way to acknowledge its achievements on the whole in a way that still seems fair, as opposed to those individual components like cinematography, director, actress. I do still think it'll get some of those as well, but this win will definitely open up that Best Picture category.
I agree with you. This is easy. Roma wins safely here. The Academy will ensure that Roma gets its moment, especially in the event that something terrible happens and we see Adam McKay or, God forbid, a Farrelly brother on stage at the end of the night, which is a shame because there are so many other strong contenders in this category and absent from the nominations list that are better films than Roma. And I still love Roma, but nowhere near the actual best foreign language film this year.
Agreed. If we're going to talk about who should win, I've got to go Cold War. I went back and forth, but this film really crept up on me. While Roma hits hard in the moment, Cold War really just lingers in such a haunting way. It's a love story, it's an untraditional musical, and those are usually not two descriptions that would attract me. But it's just that good.
I agree with you completely. Who should win is Cold War. It is no secret, I love Cold War. Paweł Pawlikowski's exquisite love letter to Poland, politics, and people under the shadow of the Iron Curtain is just simply a masterpiece. You said it tremendously. While Roma can be this emotional smack in the face, Cold War is this specter that haunts your house for weeks and years to come. It is framed through the narrative thread of two lovers who endure through music and the passage of time. It's simply a masterpiece. Now, you may know Pawlikowski from his previous film that took this category some years back, which is Ida, and his follow-up is even more gorgeous to look at. One thing I thought was great is our friend Mark Commode perhaps described it best as Casablanca meets La La Land as reimagined by Andrzej Wajda or Agnieszka Holland. And I think that is just beautifully put. Sadly, Shay, and unjustly, Cold War won't win any awards at the Academy this year, but it should. It is far better than Roma in every sense. All right, Shay, actual best foreign language film of 2018.
So I think Cold War probably is simply the best. I mean, it's just inarguable to me. But what the heck, I am going to cheat again. And
sensing a trend.
That's what it's for. We get to make the rules. We get to break the rules. I'm just going to give a few honorable mentions that I think at least deserve the recognition. So in a really close second place, there is the insanely dark and twisted fairy tale about human nature, about gender, about the environment, and of course about trolls. That is the Swedish film Border.
Brilliant film.
I also want to give a shout out to a thriller that takes place in essentially one location with one man on the phone, a la Tom Hardy in Locke, and that is the Danish film The Guilty. It is the most tense 90 minutes you will ever spend. I saw it twice, and the second time, even knowing what happened, I still could not breathe.
That's right. We saw its debut over at the Telluride Horror Fest this
Yes.
year, and it was a masterpiece.
Just captivating. And finally, one quirky and creepy film that I just cannot get out of my head, and that is the Greek comedy Pity, in which a man's wife comes out of a sustained coma only to make him realize that the only thing he truly craves in life is the pity of others. And it builds methodically and horrifically to the best film ending of the year for me. There is just no one doing dark comedy these days like the Greeks. And I think this is a great example, too, of back what I was saying at the beginning, where the Academy has such an opportunity to be introducing some Americans to films they would not otherwise be seeing. So why not use foreign language films to shake it up a little bit? Go out on a limb and just nominate some other things that are not getting the recognition elsewhere.
I couldn't agree more, and those are all marvelous suggestions. I might also plug the amazing film Burning, which was also definitely on this list as well. As far as actual best for me, again, I'm plugging my Polish masterwork, Cold War, yet again. It is narratively so unlike any other film in this category this year. It's part historical melodrama, part political satire. It's drenched in Eastern and Central European miserableism. It's shot lovingly in black and white. Oh, and it's also an art house musical. It is a love story, yes, but it's also a deconstruction of the malleability and of identity under the historical imposition of ideology to the human experience. It is a tribute to the tragic lives of quiet desperation, sacrifice to ever-shifting ideals. It's also about how art informs culture and is occasionally trapped by its potential to be hijacked, to forge, assimilate, or rebel against our national and individual loyalties. The music and score are haunting. The camera movement is almost ghostly. The leads are just astonishing. Their plaintive gaze is aching with regret and sacrifice. And to look at it, Shay, I simply cannot do it justice through the medium of this podcast. Go see Cold War immediately.
Dwa serduszka, 4 oczy. Ojojoj. Co płakały we dnie w nocy. Ojojoj. Czarne oczka, co płaczecie, że się spotkać nie możecie, że się spotkać nie możecie.
So I'm just going to jump right into Best Supporting Actress here, because for me it's really few and far between, but there's usually one category where I can kind of put my personal biases aside and just have a little bit more faith in the system, and that's how I feel about Regina King as the Best Supporting Actress category. For me, I think there is no doubt that she will win, she should win, and she is the actual best for me.
Wow. All right. Well, let me join you in that. The first portion of that, at least. Absolutely, Regina King will win the Academy Award. Again, this is a lock. It allows the Academy to recognize a nearly 30-plus year body of work before a retreat into some amazing work on television. I believe she's got like 3 Emmys in 4 years there. But it more importantly celebrates a return to feature films. It's her first in nearly a decade. But more importantly, Shay, it allows the Academy to recognize If Beale Street Could Talk to some degree after its notable absence from the Best Picture list. And it's a lovely performance. I'm glad to see Regina King love in the air and a return to film. So, yeah, if this one's a done deal, Regina King wins here.
Who do you think should win?
All right, Shay, I'm going to go against the grain here a bit and say who should win is Rachel Weisz for The Favorite. So please don't misunderstand. I adore Regina, and I think that the Academy has had other opportunities to award even better performances of hers. Her work in Ray and Boys in the Hood come to mind. But while it's a wonderful performance in an admittedly flawed film, for me it just doesn't match Weisz's nuanced tooth and claw conniving in The Favorite. And hey, let's also talk about that body of work. Admittedly, I would contend that her more liberal critical criteria and her choices in her early career might have worked against her to some degree, but as of 2015, she has begun a real shift in quality, coincidentally, when she appeared in The Lobster. Yorgos Lanthimos has a real knack for getting the unexpected out of his actors, and there's no exception here. It is the best performance out of this group, and I would love to see an upset here.
And while we're praising Yorgos' ability to get the best out of his actresses, I would actually have to say, if forced at gunpoint to mention any other actress in this category, I actually think Emma Stone gave the best performance to date of hers. I'm usually not a huge fan of hers, but it was just one of those instances where it kind of felt like the role that she was born to play.
Okay, that's fair enough. I mean, I would argue that for me, her best work is in Birdman, but no, she does fine work here. And my God, what a hard line of competition between Coleman and Weisz to have to try to make a statement in a film, right?
Okay, Jack, so who was your actual best supporting actress?
All right, Shay. So this is a wonderful opportunity to actually put into practice what you had defined as one of the central ideas behind this podcast, which is to introduce audiences to some astonishingly good films and performances that may be outside the mainstream a bit, that they've not yet come into contact. So I am lobbying hard here for the magnificent breakout performance of the always brilliant Dominique Fishback in Night Comes On. Small film, and while not a perfect film, Fishback is perfect in it. She is ripe to break into the mainstream, although she's already signaled her brilliance in some critically acclaimed television pieces that critics loved and audiences have ignored. Her debut as a single mother in the criminally underrated Show Me a Hero was magnificent.
She was incredible.
Followed by her standout role in The Deuce, both David Simon joints. And my God, does he have a knack for finding and cultivating astonishing talent, Shay, from underrepresented actors? Can anyone speak about Idris Elba or Michael B. Jordan? Well, she is as good, if not better than both of them, and it's time we made her mainstream. Dominique Fishback, find her, watch her, and thank me later. All right, Shay, well, we move on to the category of Best Adapted Screenplay. Who do you think will take this?
I think this one is Spike Lee's to lose. I mean, this is probably, unfortunately, his best shot at walking home with an award on Sunday, which is a major injustice, but I think just a reality. And so this is going to be the Academy's best way to clear their conscience.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. BlacKkKlansman will win here, but for all the wrong reasons. While I will argue that the script is perhaps the least effective component of Spike's latest opus on race relations, it is the key opportunity for the Academy to do the right thing, as it were, and finally recognize Spike after decades of ignoring him. It's been travesty, to say the least, and the Academy will cynically use this category to get their moment. The irony here is that the Academy first dropped the ball some 30 years ago by not even nominating Do the Right Thing for Best Picture, while awarding it, of course, to Driving Miss Daisy. I'm going to pause and say that again. Awarding it to Driving Miss Daisy for Best Picture. And in retrospect, which film got race in America right, Shay? And now, 30 years later, the fact that Spike has to once again go head-to-head with essentially a Driving Miss Daisy reboot, well, I have nothing to say about that anymore. It's just the perfect reflection of America and the state of cinema, isn't it? Both of us longstanding viewers of the Academy Awards know the game the Academy plays, where obviously sometimes the best things aren't awarded and they go into payback cycle. I think one of the most egregious times for me was being a much younger man and getting so angry the night that they awarded Tommy Lee Jones Best Supporting Actor for The Fugitive over Ray Fiennes for Schindler's List. But then being told really, okay, but that was kind of just a payback for some of his earliest work, perhaps most notably for Coal Miner's Daughter. It's cynical, it's ridiculous that we do that, but once you're in the cycle, it has to continue. So if this is one of the only categories in which the Academy can try to amend its egregious mistakes from the past with Spike, I'll take it.
Right, agreed. It's one thing, though, to me to say, like, oh, all right, we made a mistake last year or 2 years ago or 5 years ago. How does it take 30 years to recognize that Do the Right Thing is a masterpiece? How are you the authority on film and you're just coming around to like, oh yeah, maybe Spike Lee is a filmmaker of note?
I have no idea why the Academy is so enamored of drivers and their backseat passengers solving race in America, but we're there. All right, so let's move on to, Shay, who should win in this category?
Okay, so I'm torn here because, like you said, I don't think BlacKkKlansman really has the strongest screenplay out of all of its components. I don't really feel that strongly about any of these films through the lens of their screenplay. I think there are some really beautiful moments of If Beale Street Could Talk, but I do think that speaks more to the poetry of James Baldwin's words, his actual, words within the novel,
Absolutely,
being stronger than Barry Jenkins' on-screen interpretation of them.
Well put.
So I do think I'll go Black Klansman again for should win, especially given that the end does really justify the means. I mean, there is no doubt that Spike Lee really makes his case for why we need this film right now.
All right. Well, I'm going to go here with the writing, which is what this category is supposedly about.
Really?
And simply for me, the Coen brothers' anthology of meditations on death and existentialism definitely vary between the joyfully comedic and the tragically poetic. It is gorgeous writing, and optics aside, and let me just be clear, if Spike somehow took home Best Director, I'd be among the loudest supporters, although it's not going to happen. But optics aside, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is simply the best writing from this category. Coen brothers, of course, have done great adaptations in these halls before with No Country for Old Men, and they've very quietly taken home some of the best screenplay awards around the country for this, the most recent being at the Venice Film Festival. So Shay, for me, maybe a bit unpopular to say, but in regards to the script, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs is both who should win and the actual best bit of adapted screenwriting this year.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. I think while it was not my favorite film on the whole, there are some absolutely beautiful segments and undeniably well written. I mean, you got that for sure.
Well, who do you think then is the actual best adapted screenplay of the year?
My actual best is Widows, which I think was a criminally underrated film this year. Not only do I think it is just a flawless film on so many levels that was snubbed in many categories, but I think this is the best representation of what an adaptation should be. This is an update that successfully upends a lot of genre tropes. It actually feels necessary and relevant and of the now, whereas many adaptations feel a little bit inhibited by their circumstances or just stuck in the time and place of that original novel or that original screenplay. And it's just a really fun film, too. Too often, heist films become overly complicated, overly plotted. This is a really tight film that hits all the right beats. It manages to be interesting and modern and realistic without a single boring moment.
Well, there's no arguments here. I've been a longtime champion of the great Steve McQueen. I think Hunger happens to be one of the greatest debut films of all time in history, and I've loved his work ever since. And for me, if I could just craft an honorary Oscar this year, I would give it to just the scene in the limousine where Colin Farrell has left the stage and is arriving back to his home in suburbia. Just a magnificent piece of work. So good choice.
Well, while we're on screenplays, let's go ahead and talk about Best Original Screenplay, or as we all know, the backdoor Best Picture.
Well, Shay, of course, there is a long-standing precedent for this category being affectionately dubbed the real best film of the year that the average American just couldn't get or handle. And a cursory review of past winners in relation to the Best Picture awards seems to bear that out, right? These are your Pulp Fictions over your Forrest Gumps, your Eternal Sunshines of the Spotless Mind over your Million Dollar Babies, your Fargo over the English Patient. So if keeping with the tradition of any sort of justice for critically acclaimed or art house cinema finding a place within the halls of mediocrity, then this is the place for the favorites to have its moment. Although it is with what I will argue is the weakest and maybe most accessible of Yorgos Lanthimos' films, hopefully it will finally alert the masses to this most masterful auteur. This is not only what will win, I believe, Shay, it is what should win for Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah, I am in complete agreement. While I also don't think that this is Yorgos' best film, it does have a really strong and witty script, and it deserves to win here. I actually think the fact that it is so accessible is going to be a strength. You'll see audiences get behind it just as much as the Academy, but it's still weird enough to uphold that tradition of this being the most innovative category for the Academy. It also really supports its amazing female leads. They get to be layered and complicated and downright ugly in a way that feels liberating. So I'd be happy to see it win, and I'm also going to go ahead and make it my pick as well for should win.
Stay weird, Yorgos, even if you get the hardware.
All right, so let's move on to the actual Best Original Screenplay. If we hold true that this award kind of represents the most ambitious, inventive film of the year, then nothing compares to Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You. It is so funny and clever and bold. And I think the genius of the writing is that it manages to inject these incredible moments of magical realism so seamlessly into the world of the film. It is never awkward or stilted or confusing, and it never loses momentum. It never detours or goes off the rails, where I think a lot of films would. And I'm honestly just so disappointed that a lot of audiences and critics relegated it to that category of like great first effort. Something that showed promise but ultimately couldn't pull it off, because I think that is just so false and misleading, and it really undermines how radical this film is.
Once again, I am so thrilled to see that we apparently cribbed off each other, and I would argue that we are dead on right. With nods to Blind Spotting, has any other recent film felt so innovative, so fresh, so vital, so political? Right? Not since Vintage Spike has an independent filmmaker so boldly delivered on the promises of magical realism, as you mentioned, but revolution, change, social critique, and make no mistake, Sorry to Bother You feels like a goddamn proletarian rallying cry. America has never fully taken to the brilliant art of absurdism the way the rest of Europe does, and as predicted, the film mostly served to confound the average viewer. I mean, let it sink in that both Solo, a Star Wars story, and Christopher Robin were more recognized by the Academy this year than Sorry to Bother You. Boots Riley himself remarked on his snub that, quote, I think that most of the film industry wants to see something new, and there's a large percentage of the industry that actually agrees with what I'm saying in this film. Obviously, with any movie that takes chances, there are also folks who hated it. That's to be expected. But the largest factor as to why we didn't get nominated is that we didn't actually run a campaign that aimed to get a nomination for screenplay or song. We didn't buy for your consideration ads in the trade magazines, and we didn't service the whole Academy with screeners. Spoken like a true democratic socialist. So once again,
it is pretty fitting.
So once again, can we lament the artistically conservative bubble of laziness that surrounds the Academy? Don't rely on what's spoon-fed to you. Go out and find the best films. Shay, this film is proof that we need more political radicals making independent films, and Sorry to Bother You is provocative, hilarious, absurd, and at times ridiculous. But then again, so is the experience of being black in America. Between this film, Blind Spotting, and episodes of Atlanta this year, I've finally really come to understand what the great author Chester Himes has always asserted. Quote, I always thought what I was writing was realism. It never occurred to me that I was writing absurdity. Realism and absurdity are so similar in the lives of the American black that one cannot tell the difference. For me, Shay, Sorry to Bother You should and is the best original screenplay of the year.
Absolutely. I think we should go ahead and coin the superlatives backdoor best picture annual award to send out to Boots Riley for Sorry to Bother You.
T-shirts are coming.
Boots Riley, they ain't murk me yet. Gon' get shit poppin' like Percocet. Got pent up anger ain't surface yet.
Okay, Shay, we move on now to Best Director. In this category, who will win?
I think this one's gotta be Alfonso Cuarón, and I think it's pretty well deserved. It is an undeniably beautiful film and well made in pretty much every aspect, and I think it makes sense to use this award to recognize what a personal film it is. If you subscribe to auteur theory in cinema, there is no other film in this category that belongs to the director quite like Roma. For the same reason, I think Cuarón should win this category. I'm not saying it's a perfect film, but in the filmmaking sense, it is pretty damn near perfect. I mean, just take the opening credits. This is a year that forces me to admit that one of my favorite shots of the entire year is technically of a black and white soapy puddle.
All right, so you have Cuarón as will and should.
Yes.
For both. All right, fantastic. I'm with you in the will department. Alfonso Cuarón will win here. While there's no guarantee that the seemingly unstoppable Roma will become the first foreign film to nab the award for Best Picture, we've certainly noticed the recent trend of the award for direction not being automatically tied to the achievement of the film, right? Which is great for the return of the auteurs. And there is no hotter triumvirate of auteurs in cinematic favor at the moment than the so-called Three Amigos of Mexican descent. Cuarón, Inarritu, and Del Toro, who have combined now to take home the Best Director statue 4 out of the last 5 years. This Sunday will make it 5 out of the last 6, which is a brilliant thing, I would argue, for Mexican representation, although I would personally argue that Cuarón is my least favorite out of that trio of brilliant directors. Nevertheless, Cuarón will take home the gold. In my should category, despite the continued criminal overlooking of great female directors, once again in this category, and I'll talk more on that in a second, on the whole, I would honestly feel great if any 4 of the 5 nominated in this category won. I won't mention that one I wouldn't. It rhymes with McKay. And while for sentiment and historical representation and for fucking reparation's sake, I would be thrilled if Spike somehow pulled this off, I'm giddy that we have 3 amazing foreign directors here, all brilliant, all with astonishing films, all equally deserving, but who should win out of that pack this year, for reasons stated earlier, is the Polish director, Paweł Pawlikowski. All right, Shay, who was the actual best director of the year?
All right, well, I feel a little bad given everything you just said that I'm going to go with a white guy. But I really just have to go with Paul Schrader. I was so impressed by First Reformed, and I just don't understand how it is barely showing up anywhere this award season. This is a return to form for the writer-director who can be a bit all over the place, and I actually agree with a lot of comments that have been made about First Reformed as a more grown-up taxi driver, but not really in a condescending kind of way, more just as proof that this is a filmmaker who doesn't resist growth and change and evolution, and I just want to recognize him for that. I don't think even a lot of our best filmmakers' careers go that way in later years, and I just think it's admirable.
I'm with you in loving First Reformed and Paul Schrader. As you know, we'll get to that later in the podcast. But for me, the actual best direction for the year, let me just begin with a rant. Yet again, the Academy shamefully overrepresented men in the directing category, made even more egregious this year by some of the masterful films directed by women, all drastically outclassing the middling and insipid tripe that was Vice, Green Book, Bohemian Rhapsody by a mile. Brilliant directors with brilliant films, and since the Academy simply can't name them, let me just have a moment to name their names here. Filmmakers like Deborah Granick, like Lucrezia Martel, like Chloe Zhao, like Tamara Jenkins, like Josephine Decker, all could have easily made that final list without controversy, but the actual best direction this year was by the eternally great and eternally disregarded auteur Lynn Ramsey, for You Were Never Really Here. I don't know what else to say more about it. Ramsey has always been amazing. She has always been consistent, and yet she always seems to be overlooked, and it frankly upsets me. This is Ramsey here in this film at the top of her craft. It is poetic. It is transcendent. It goes against every expectation you can have for a genre film. It is simply a masterpiece. And Shay, I am so bitter about her snub that I can only revert in silent protest to the words of Globe and Mail critic Barry Hertz. We simply do not deserve Lynn Ramsey.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is egregious to yet again not have a single woman even nominated, but especially this film in particular, to not even nominate Lynn Ramsey is just a crime. Okay, Jack, so we've got 3 more categories left.
We are coming down to the big ones.
Yes, these are the big ones. So let's get into it with Best Actor. Who do you think will win?
This one's quite easy. Rami Malek will easily take one of the weakest fields of recent memory. A weak field, by the way, that didn't have to be. Just imagine a field that was Ethan Hawke, Joaquin Phoenix, Lakeith Stanfield, Josh Hamilton, and Steven Yeun. I mean, even for my heavy critiques of this institution over the years, I've resisted calls of irrelevancy, but the fact that Ethan Hawke failed to even garner a nomination for the best performance of his career, and make no mistake that Hawke gave the best male performance this year, then I fear the Academy just may be fundamentally broken.
Yeah, I'm honestly shocked it's been going this way, but everything points to Rami Malek winning. I think he's a great actor, and there is no doubt he embodied Freddie Mercury like nobody else could. But it just feels so out of place, and I Yeah, I don't have much to say because it's a pretty underwhelming category and choice. Who do you think should win?
Well, while I wish nothing but the best for Mr. Malik, who does pull off a big and uncanny, albeit soulless Freddie Mercury, I think that the most heartfelt and understated and nuanced performance here is Willem Dafoe for his beautiful and underrated At Eternity's Gate. And yes, I'm still a bit bitter that he was robbed that year for Best Supporting category for his brilliant work in the Florida Project. Shay, I'm not quite sure I'll ever get over that.
No, I agree. And, if I sound really underwhelmed and unexcited for this one, it's because I am. It's hard to even pick a who should win because I think you can see where we're leading to with our actual best. But as far as who should win, I'm just going to go ahead and say Christian Bale. Just because, I don't know. To me, when he's in the category, he always kind of should. He just puts himself into every role, his entire self into every role, and the transformation alone is stunning.
Well, if this were a contest for creating before and after transformation photos, Christian Bale would always win. And I love Christian Bale. I don't think this is his representative of his best work as a performance, but okay.
Okay, so what we're all really waiting for, though, is who is your actual best?
There's no secret here. See all of the above that I've already ranted against. Ethan Hawke gave the most heartbreaking, stoic, beautiful, and quietly devastating performance of his life. And I say this as a non-Ethan Hawke fan in general. I tend not to be moved by his performances. I never really quite got the mystique surrounding people that are fanatical about Ethan Hawke, but this was simply a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant performance. This will go down as one of the most egregious snubs of all time in Oscar history.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And it's just surreal to me that he's been left out of pretty much every major award ceremony. Like you said, he turned in the performance of a lifetime in First Reformed. I mean, Ethan Hawke has always been an endearing love interest or like the cool and charming dad. But he just broke my heart as Reverend Toller.
Absolutely.
It is also such a physical performance in the complete opposite way of what Christian Bale is doing. It's so controlled, it's so severe, but yet in this really modest and repressed sense, and it's almost sickening to watch. And I just think it is some incredible work, and it is just outrageous that he is not even nominated.
Shay, in the category of Best Female Performance, who will win?
It just seems predestined for Glenn Close this year, which I don't know if I wasn't paying attention, but kind of came out of left field. Of course, Glenn Close is great. We all love her, but I just feel like her performance is wasted on such an average film. I do have to say that her Golden Globe speech about her mother feeling that she never accomplished anything and the necessity of women to find their personal fulfillment did really get me. I think it struck a chord on an emotional level that really any ambitious woman can recognize, and it is so appropriate for everything that we're going through and finally starting to look at through a different lens. So, if you're gonna be up there accepting an award when there are so many other deserving performances, then that is the speech that you want to give. It felt really satisfying. I mean, it does raise the question of whether or not she can do it again on Sunday, or it will just feel flat for a second time.
I'd love to award her for that speech alone. But Shay, while my heart pleads Olivia Colman, my head also knows that the Academy is going to finally rectify the 6 other times it overlooked Glenn Close. Is Glenn Close amazing? Of course. Does she have an incredible body of work deserving of this award? Undoubtedly. But is this the best performance of the year? No. But will I look forward to hearing her have a platform, to hear what she has to say about female agency and toxic masculinity within the creative arts? Well, you better believe it. But if I'm being honest, for me, it still will be a bit bittersweet. I can only liken it to watching Paul Newman finally win for The Color of Money, while all the while you're remembering The Verdict or Cool Hand Luke. But speaking of should, Shay, who should win this category?
I mean, everything you just said about Olivia Colman nailed it. She is just magnificent, and she should absolutely be the one up there on stage, and I will get up and cheer if it somehow does happen. She is just always so good. I know we've both loved her from Peep Show. She's always showing up in these great bit parts, like in Edgar Wright's Hot Fuzz, or the hotel manager in The Lobster. Just that one tiny little scene of her singing. I laugh every time. I was just watching a video of it again, just because it will never not make me just joyous. I think there's no more perfect an actress, too, for Yorgos Lanthimos' strange brand of humor. And she allows enough room for empathy in Queen Anne that I just don't know a lot of other actresses would be able to pull off. It is, on paper, such a wretched character that she just brings
a real pathos
life
to it, right? Yeah, it's amazing.
But Jack, who do you think should win?
Well, I'm going to make this very easy for my final two. Like you, I have followed the amazing Olivia Colman since her breakout in 2003 as Sophie Chapman in our beloved Peep Show. But to see her evolution into an actor of such depth and magnitude as was seen in The Favorite is just mind-blowing to me. She has really come into her own. She simply owns the film. Period. And not only should win here, but it was easily the best female performance of the year by a mile. And don't just take our word for it. That has been proved internationally by her dominance on the award circuits, with now 17 plus wins for Best Actress, including the National Society for Film Critics, the Golden Globes, the BAFTAs, and the Venice International Film Festival. Shay, the Oscars may have a debt to settle with Glenn Close, but we and the rest of the world know it was all Olivia this year.
No, absolutely agreed. Olivia Colman's my actual best, too. There's not really a lot to add there. But just to bring up another name, I do just want to mention Toni Collette's downright horrifying performance in Hereditary. I don't know if this was overlooked here because it's a horror movie, which is a shame, or just if the performance itself suffered by the fact that some of the film's brilliant parts didn't really come together as a satisfying whole. But I think it was a career best for Collette, and I still wake up sometimes in the night afraid she's going to be at the foot of my bed telling me that she never really loved me. Okay, Jack, so we are down to the final category, the most important award of the night, and that is Best Picture. Drum roll. Who will win?
Okay, Shay. Well, while nowhere a lock, I think that Roma will ride its staggering momentum to the statue, barring some sort of reverse Moonlight event in which I'll be forced and dismayed to endure a clip of a terribly accented Viggo Mortensen introducing soul food to Mahershala Ali, although which would sustain my hate rage for a full calendar year until our next Oscars episode. But my money is on the very good, very dreamy, and very poetic and loving homage to 1970s Colonia Roma district. It should win in this field, and Shay, given its competition, let's hope it does for cinema's sake.
No, absolutely. And I think that's a choice that would make, everybody happy, if not at least not angry. But, I really think Green Book is going to win because I'm cynical and because I don't
and
think...
you're probably right.
And because I don't think we learn from our past mistakes. I think you're seeing this reaction to the backlash where voters are just doubling down on their love of this film only because others are telling them not to, and just completely ignoring the fact that they have a chance to vote for the greater good here. Which leads me into my should. I think Black Klansman is actually the best picture we deserve.
Yes.
I don't think it's Spike Lee's best film. I don't think it's the best film in this category necessarily, but I do think it's the film that matters the most. I think putting that official Oscar seal of approval on Black Klansman goes a lot farther than any of the other choices in terms of what we want the industry to stand for, where we want it to be going. And while I'm generally against the Academy using its awards to right past wrongs, I think the scope of the wrong against Spike Lee, against Do the Right Thing, is much bigger here. And it really could be a statement in moving forward and breaking this cycle and actually being relevant to this audience that they're so desperately trying to reach. And I also think it actually could win. There are enough first and second place votes that might just split, and we could actually see Spike Lee up there, so we'll see.
I mean, I don't. You're entirely correct in that it's nowhere near Spike Lee's best film. I do think what he was trying to do was terribly important, and he swung for the fences, right? Which is what we really need to ask of cinema these days, to do something amazing. I just think that the sophistication and beauty and care wherein Cuarón made Roma with, I think will just ultimately prevail with an Academy that loves films about personal discovery and homage and memory.
No, I think you absolutely could be right. I hope it goes that way instead. But again, the cynical part of me I can see it happening already. I can see
another driving Miss
yes,
Daisy.
Yes. Okay, but let's move on to actual best. If you've been paying attention, I think you probably already know what we're going to say. You probably already know that we agree, but once again, this is another year where the actual best film of the year is not even on this list. But Jack, what is the actual best film of the year objectively?
Well, I have to say that we actually had the good fortune to see this together with a few other folks, and the experience is still so visceral and so fresh in my mind. I knew the moment we walked out into the cold air that this was the best film of the year. I knew it probably would remain so. And after viewing nearly 300 films, I still have to say it is for me. Paul Schrader's magnum opus, bookend to Taxi Driver, is a haunting and devastating meditation on faith, nihilism, longing, catastrophism, the supernatural, repression, and existential crisis, and by far the best film of the year. Let me sum it up by saying that in my long love affair with cinema, Shay, only 3 films in memory have left me literally unable to speak or move for a bit when the lights came up. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was the first, followed by the 2014 Ukrainian film The Tribe, and now First Reformed. It is a masterpiece and the best film of 2018.
So well put. It is just a beautiful film that, like you said, just leaves you speechless. I've had times in months after watching this film where I'll be talking to someone, just out in the street in broad daylight, and have to stop because I am getting choked up by this real visceral loss that I feel from just even thinking about this film. I just don't understand what happened here. This isn't like some obscure gem. Ethan Hawke is a name, Paul Schrader is a name. It's the very grown up, somber drama that you would think the Academy would want from both of them. So why is it not here? I mean, the only thing I can think of is that maybe people are shying away from this movie because it is scary and devastating as hell. But if that's why, I mean, shame on you. If we're talking about the Best Picture needing to have that sense of urgency and relevancy, then nothing really has matched that standard quite like First Reformed. As you said, it is catastrophic and apocalyptic in a sense, and it is a film that is dead set on the necessity and the unavoidable experience of suffering. But I also don't think it in any way relishes in any of those things. This is not a nihilistic film. If anything, it is almost unbearably human. So that is why it is my pick for the best film of the year. If you've still somehow missed First Reformed, you have just got to see it. I will personally rent it for you. You can write it my way.
Shay, that is so well put. And yeah, I'm completely at a loss for why the Academy did this. All I can say is that Academy voters, you have forced me to start putting whiskey in my Pepto-Bismol.
You can't tell that's what we've been doing this whole time.
That's pretty much fair.
Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow?
My hands shake as I write these lines.
Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Can God forgive us for what we've done to this world?
Who can know the mind of God?
Well, there you have it. Our Oscar picks for who will win, who should win, and the actual best of the year in cinema. As we close out, I just want to say that my one additional wish for the Academy Awards this year, no matter who wins, is for it to be a celebration of film. The immediate pushback from cutting categories, I think, really shows that people want to see filmmakers more than they want to see celebrities, and they want to see reflections of the films that they loved more than song and dance. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Superlatives. I sincerely hope you'll join us next time, if only to find out the ultimate Oscar bet fate. Will I have to watch a Die Hard marathon, or will Jack be subject to the mythical teen romance of Twilight? Jack, do you think you're going to be Team Edward or Team Jacob?
You know, Shay, I think I've always been Team Jasper. Is that a character? I have no idea.
You know, you caught me in my tracks. It sounds like it might be. Yes, I think there is a Jasper for you to be a team member.
All I know is he looks angsty on the sidelines.
So but they all look angsty.
That's me.
I can't. This episode of the Superlatives Film Podcast was recorded from Boulder, Colorado, written and hosted by Shay Westcott and Jack Hanley, and produced by Shay Westcott. For more information on upcoming episodes, updates, or to send us your thoughts, visit The Superlatives online at facebook.com/The Superlatives Film Podcast. And if you like what you heard today, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and help more folks to discover The Superlatives. That's all for this episode. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to join us on the next episode of The Superlatives Cinema Curated.